This is Tim Cronin from Seton Hill University with Figured Out Baseball, and in this video we're going to talk to you guys about pitch design with a curveball. So the curveball, the complete opposite of a four-seam fastball. We talked about a couple of previous videos with a four-seam fastball, trying to create as much backspin and true backspin as we can. The curveball will be the complete opposite. We're trying to create true topspin with the curveball. Some guys throw a curve, some guys throw more of a slurve. It pretty much depends on where guys come from their arm slot. Guys who come from a higher arm slot tend to have more of a 12-6 curveball. Guys who tend to drop their arm slot a little bit, throw from a 3/4 or even a low 3/4, tend to throw more of the slurve. So the difference between the two, a 12-6 curveball and slurve, a 12-6 tends to spin more truly top down. You can see the seams don't really tilt, and when you throw a slurve, all it is, it still spins top down, except you're implying a little bit of tilt on the ball. And that tilt usually comes in a curveball from the slot in which they throw it from. I guess it makes sense. High slot guys, they pull straight down, the ball comes here. Guys who throw from a lower slot, they tend to get on the side of it a little more, and the ball tends, that's how we get that tilt on the curveball. I'll talk to you guys about a couple cues that we use that I've learned over the years for throwing a curveball. So if you have an athlete that's just starting to learn a curveball, and you can apply some of these cues on him. Some people like just literally, they say, get the ball out front and pull it down. The big thing with that is making sure that you're using the seam as leverage. Your athletes have to have something to pull down. So make sure that their middle finger is on this seam. So ideally, when we release the curveball, we want the ball to be like this with our fingers across it. So we tell them to put a lot of pressure on the outside of this middle finger, pressing up right against this bottom seam right here, and simply tell them to just pull that down. That's something that might work for some athletes, might not work for another. Another cue that we tell them is to just get the middle finger out front. Some guys tend to get too much on the side of the baseball with the middle finger like this. We want the middle finger out front for more of a true curveball. So that might be another cue that would work with guys, just telling them to get the middle finger out front. And with other people, we actually have a guy on our team, and you can ask him, how do you throw your curveball, or what do you think when you throw your curveball? He says, I don't know, I just grip it and rip it, and whatever happens, happens. And it's one of our best pitches. So some guys, you just have to give them the grip and let it do the work. Other people, you might have to guide them more into what the release is supposed to look like. Trevor Bauer, with the Reds right now, he's also a guy, he believes in the karate chop. So he feels that he's going to get to a point where he's here, and all he's going to do is simply chop down like this, which is pretty much ideally doing the same thing that we mentioned with the other cues, getting the middle finger out front and just pulling the ball down. So whatever works, you might have to try a bunch of different cues with your athletes before something that works and they pick up. Another one that might be good is tell them to throw the back of their hand at the catcher. Again, this is one where a guy might get on the side of the ball a little bit, and you tell him to throw the back of his hand right at the catcher, and that tends to get guys to throw more of a true curveball. In terms of grips, I don't think there's really one way to do it. The grip that I was taught, simply looking at the front of the baseball, putting your two fingers together right here with this middle finger, pressing it against the outside of that seam. A lot of guys in big league baseball and even at the college level are starting to go more towards the spiked curveball. Anytime we throw a curveball, this is a middle finger dominant pitch. We want the middle finger to be the most dominant acting finger when we're throwing this curveball. So guys tend to put too much pressure on the index finger, which takes pressure off the middle finger, which tends to make the ball come out more slidery than true curveball. So when we spike the ball, you can spike it a tiny bit, you can spike it a lot, or you can go with a true spike. By doing that, we take pressure off the baseball with the index finger and put more pressure on it with the middle finger, which tends to make it more of a true 12-6 curveball or a true spinning curveball rather than a slider. So this would be the spike. Again, you can do a little spike, you can do a lot spike, or anywhere in between, whatever's comfortable for your athletes. Some, when they take the full index finger off the ball, if a guy has smaller hands, they tend to feel that there's not enough finger pressure on the baseball and it's slipping out. So whatever works for your athlete, different grips might work for different guys. You can go across those seams. Some guys like to tilt the ball downwards and go on, instead of up here, you go down here. And I guess a perk of going down here, when you tilt the ball down like this, you get a little more thumb action on this side of the seam. You get a little more leverage there. I know other guys that flip the ball around and throw with the middle finger off of this top seam right here. I just think the biggest thing is find a seam that is comfortable that you can use as leverage, and then rip that seam down. Again, guys who throw from a higher slot will have an easier time throwing more of a 12-6 curveball, and guys who come from a lower slot, it may blend into more of a slurvy type thing, and that's not wrong, that's just kind of the way the guys release it. In terms of thumb position, that's something that's variable per guy. We actually have a couple guys that prefer to grip the ball, the normal grip, the first grip that we talked about. Some guys like to put their thumb right here on the seam and almost use that as leverage as well. Other guys like to tuck their finger under and put less thumb pressure on the ball. Again, it's totally variable depending on what your pitcher likes to do. I would say here at Seton Hill, we have a couple guys that go here on the seam and then a couple guys that go down here on the seam. Whatever's comfortable. Guys that come up here tend to feel they have more grip on the baseball. For guys who have smaller hands, I would recommend up here. Guys who have big hands and get around the ball pretty much, if we tuck our thumb underneath, I think that'd be better for those athletes. Some other drills that we can use to learn to throw a curveball more effectively. You can use a softball, and a softball is obviously bigger and it's tougher to get your fingers around. The way I like to look at it is if you can throw a good curveball with a softball, you'll certainly be able to throw one with a baseball. So if your guys are throwing flat grounds or right before their bullpen, if you give them a softball and tell them to spin a couple breaking balls and then give them the baseball back in their hand, it tends to give them a better feel for the baseball and how the spin is supposed to come off the hand. Another thing that is effective is throwing hockey pucks. I know that's relatively popular. You want to grip the hockey puck and just try to see how much spin that you can create on the puck. And you'll be able to see the way the hockey puck spins, kind of how you're releasing the baseball. If it's a true tighter spin, that's more 12-6, you'll see it. And if you start to tilt your axis a little bit and be more slurvy, you'll see the hockey puck start to spin a little sideways. But what we want to see is front spin on that hockey puck. Anytime we see the puck straighten out or start to move pretty weird, that probably means an inconsistent release. And then we obviously want to carry over those releases to a baseball. Another drill we can use for the curveball, kind of like we mentioned with the four seam, is when you simply just color half of the baseball. And then when you throw your curveball, you ideally want to see the color stay on the same side. If we start to lose the color and you see it, then you don't see it, then you see it, then you don't see it, that means we're probably getting too much on the side of it and it's going into more of a true slider. And there's nothing wrong with throwing the true slider, but if we're classifying our pitches properly and we're trying to throw a curveball, then I think coloring the half of the ball and really seeing one color stay on the same side would be effective. This is Tim Cronin from Seton Hill University. That was my video on pitch design with a curveball. Please check out my next video, which is going to be pitch design with sliders.